Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG, and this is the Game Master's Guide. And generally, I bring topics up about role playing in a bunch of different ways, and I have been staying away from the Dungeons and Dragons channel. But I've determined that most of my questions are actually general enough to apply to any role play game. But Dungeons and Dragons, of course, is the by far the most played RPG, and so I thought I'd put my questions here today. And today I'm kind of flipping the script. Instead of offering to answer questions for all of you, I'm going to be providing information and asking you questions. And as you go through this video, think about the answers to the questions, and if you want, feel free to go ahead and enter them in the comment section down below or in the chat box if you're here on Twitch when I'm recording it. I'll be here for about 45 minutes or so, I anticipate. And we're going to get down to those questions in just a second. But before we do that, make sure you go down below and push all the buttons so that the algorithm knows that you're part of our audience. And let's get started, shall we?
Absorbing damage is the name of the game.
So this is the only the second day that I've been going clean shaven again. I generally have a full beard, and so this is an interesting new phenomenon for me to feel like I'm out there where you can see me. The last time, one of the times that I did this, the first time that I shaved my beard after my daughter was born, quite some time ago now. She was like 6, and she came home from school, and of course I was like this, and she said, "Dad, what?" She didn't know who I was, and I said, "Honey, I'm your dad." And she goes, "What happened to your face?" And I said, "Well, I shaved off my beard, silly. I just wanted to look a little different for a while." And she says, "Well, put it back." So I don't go very long without facial hair, but this is part of my transformation protocols, which I've done a couple of videos on in the past. But having said that, today we're going to be talking about the questions that I need to ask of you as both players and potential players. Now, this video will be put up on YouTube, and I anticipate there we'll have a lot of people who are not role players that might see the video. And so the first thing I need to ask is, what happened to playfulness? If you look at the American culture today, you do see them talking about sports. You do see them talking about some competitions. But there's no longer the kind of the wackiness that used to be on television. There isn't the improvisational nature of some of the humor shows. And in general, it seems like we're a lot more serious than we were a decade ago, or heaven forbid, the 50 years that I've been a storyteller. When I was a youngster, I remember shows like Laugh-In and the Carol Burnett Show. A lot of the variety shows that were on the air were improvisational and wacky. They were just silly, and you don't see much of that unless it's got some sort of edge or some sort of agenda behind it. And to me, it's kind of sad. But my question to you is, do you recall the playfulness? And if you have an answer for where it's gone or what's happened to it, I'd love to hear it. To me, I think if we had to put a finger on it, I think we'd have to say that the issue is that we've become too alert, too aware of our situation and who we are around, and we are fearful. We are actually cautious about it. When we get into a later one of these slides, I'll talk a little bit about one of the studies that I read about some time ago concerning schools, education, and playgrounds. And I did that actually rather extensively in my video about the return of recess. But that's not this video, so we'll continue. But my first primary question is, what happened to the playfulness? Where is the joy in each other's company? Where is the joy in being around people that are not within your normal purview? In the days of my youth, like I said, everyone seemed to be a lot more silly than they are now. And I wonder what happened to that. And I miss it, and I hope you do too. Second question I have has to do with the sports angle. And my question to you is, has competition become too painful? In other words, when we get the opportunity to play in sports, there are all kinds of orthopedic injuries you can get. I've got a cousin who is in that business taking care of sports injuries and stuff, and he says that they're way up, that everybody's getting hurt. And, there was, especially a few years ago, there was a great conversation going on about sports injuries, and particularly with football, with the number of concussions that are brought on. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about us as players today. You don't have the bowling leagues. You don't have the dart competitions or such as broadly as you used to. And I wonder if it may be that the video games market may have affected us in that we no longer want to experience loss. We don't want to experience the downside of a fair and open competition. Instead, we try every way we can to leverage the conversation, to leverage the outcomes of competition so that we don't have to feel any more of that negative emotion. And I think that's a dangerous place to go, because if our sense of value is associated only with the winning of competitions, when things do get challenging and tough and difficult, maybe we're not giving ourselves enough cushion, so to speak, to be able to handle those more jarring moments. And one of the major elements of playing games is that the old adage, you win some, you lose some. It's a situational variable that will come to roost occasionally, and therefore you will have loss. Now, I have a friend of mine who is a big time video game player, and I shouldn't say big time. He plays a lot of video games, and especially when he's playing a one person story driven game, he's really quick on the save button, because he'll make a move through the game, get to a save point, save it. But if he ever gets to a point where he's eliminated, that way he only has to back up just a few minutes and he hasn't lost much. And I think that's really what's going on, is that our concept of winning a game or losing a game is no longer being unbiased. It's now being adjusted so that we have found ways to avoid that negative. And in particular, when I talk about this in terms of role-playing games, I do know a lot of players who have gotten into basically a contract with their storyteller, their game master, that basically says that the game's story isn't going to require player character death at any point, and it's not going to be something that they can't avoid. And to me, this concept of not being able to face the loss has become untenable, and we need to realize that loss is a part of reality, and to get used to it. One of my favorite movies is a film called The Long Kiss Goodnight, and in that movie, a little girl is being raised by a mother who tells her at one point, life is pain, you just get used to it. And that comes back to haunt the mother near the end, when the woman herself is badly beaten up and boogered up because she's a warrior and whatever, and she's ready to give up, and the daughter, who's in tears, says, "Get up, mommy, right now." She says, "Pain, you get used to pain. You never get over pain. You just get used to it. Get up and act." And I think we get into the situation where there's so many people that haven't faced loss that even on a minor thing like a character death in a role-play game, or a missed chance on a video game, or a defeat in a four-player game of Risk is too great for us to deal with, so we simply don't engage in it. And I wonder if that might have something to do with what's happened to the playfulness, is that playfulness does have the highs of success, but it also has the lows of failure. And we need both ends of that spectrum for us to be healthy about wins and losses. And I think this also spawns from the concept that the world has just simply become too serious. There are fewer and fewer variables in the world that we know little about. I mean, they have discovered many the cures, or at least treatments for many cancers that are out there, so this cancer is survivable. They've done what they can to get a handle on the T virus and such for the AIDS community, so there's far, far more people surviving even with that horrible illness. And there are the successes being racked up by medical fields in terms of getting people past things that used to be absolute killers, has gotten to the point where there's not much left in terms of variability. And so therefore now we're so afraid of the negative implications of loss that we have just become too serious about it. When you are dealing with a world where, child illness is keeping children affected, and the mortality rate among people individually covers the age gamut quite extensively, you can't take the world too seriously because there's simply not enough time. But now, as we're getting to living longer periods of time with higher relative levels of health, perhaps we are getting too seriously worried about what might happen that we're no longer taking risks. And I also think that we have pushed the emphasis against a person who has lost and failed at something, and therefore we are almost to the point of mocking them for the failure, even though we're just as likely to be the next victim ourselves. But we've become too serious so that we can't play a silly game. We can't engage our imaginations too strongly because we don't want to be seen as being, off the bases and too far gone. And I think that's, again, a problem. Now, how many of you ever done this? You get off work one afternoon, you get in your car, and you just drive hours and hours out to some point far, far from your home to a community that doesn't know you, and you go into a restaurant or a recreation center like Dave and Buster's and just get silly and forget yourself. How many of you can actually say you've lost track of time on something without, of course, the obvious factors such as inebriation or mind-altering substances? I'm just talking about when was the last time you got lost in a moment and lost your track of time? I do recall that I was one of those lamplight kids. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. When the street lights come on, you better be back in the yard. Better be back to where your mom or your dad can yell for you, because now it's going to be time to come inside. And fighting to remember what time it is a thing that, of course, kids didn't used to have to worry about. But now, with the amount of helicopter parenting and the amount of special programs and the demands of the public education system requiring you to have so many elective credits in order to make it into universities, it's become far more regimented, and kids are losing their imagination almost as quickly as they're losing their virginity, it seems like, in today's world. But the point is that when you're a child, time doesn't have a meaning, and the concept of immortality is a given. There's one of my favorite songs by the group Rush includes the line, knowing that we're only immortal for a limited time. When we're young, we don't think about things like the end of time or the end of our afternoons or anything. And so if we can't get lost in a moment, maybe we've lost our bearings compared to the humanity we had when we were kids. Well, this also ties into it, and that is when was the last time you lost at anything? Really, in terms of not life and death things. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, when was the last time you played a game of tic-tac-toe? If you're a parent, you play a lot of tic-tac-toe with your kids, I hope, because they need to realize that there are formulas that can put you on a win most of the time mode, but it also is one of those games that every once in a while you will lose. And if you don't learn how to gracefully do so, you're setting yourself up for real problems in adulthood, because the world doesn't reward winners as overtly as we do when we're children. So make sure that you get your chances to win, but also make sure that you take your losses, take your licks, and understand that sometimes that loss is part of the process, and we have to be able to experience that, or else we actually are losing something more precious than we can imagine. When was the last time you went out and just freeformed? Now, I use the term freeform for a lot of things, but I'm generally thinking about the way the world used to be in terms of going and playing with a frisbee disc or a football or whatever. The idea of just going out and making up your own games and pretending and thinking about the world as it could be or might be or should be or would be without any limitations or restrictions. When was the last time you really were freeform? And is that now fundamentally a lost idiom? Perhaps there aren't any people left in this coming generation. If you're one that does have it, please leave a comment so that I understand that it's still going on. I'm concerned that we may have lost the idea of freeform or being improvisational in any real way. I have found that the draw of a game environment that is freeform has lost its luster, because so many people have bought into the kind of like the Hollywood line that you have to, if you're dealing with a space adventure, it has to be either clearly Star Wars or Star Trek or Babylon 5. It can't be something yet undiscovered. It can't be anything that we haven't got a definition for, because we've lost the ability to communicate with each other imaginatively. We simply want to use terms from a property that's been defined so that we can exchange conversations on it, but that's imitative rather than innovative or creative. And the point I'm asking is am I incorrect in my assessment that freeform does still possibly exist, or have all of the new imaginative forms become only imitative? And that's really the point here: is are you able to play in that world where there is no frame? Is there a place where you engage with creativity unbound? And if so, I'd love to hear what those are, what ways you find that you can communicate, that you can share information that doesn't have any boundaries or limitations or presets, so to speak. Now, the question might be, where am I going with all of this? These are a lot of rather off-the-wall questions, but the real basis for asking these questions is, what are your means of entertainment? What are the things that bring you real joy? If they are things that are of an imitative nature, then you've limited yourself to a very small framework. And I'm imploring that you consider what it would be like to operate outside of those frameworks. And one of the reasons for doing this is that the very concept of role play is actually built on the very open style of play that we had when we were kids. And, well, when I was a kid, of course, that was a half century ago. So that's of course, problematic, because it's hard to re-express that to you if you haven't had these experiences. But I want to have the conversation, and so if there's something that's in your life that is on this level of limitless and open, I'd love to hear from it. And if not, do take a look at Nikos RPG. Obviously, my logo constantly is flashing once in a while, the RPG methodology, and the Nikos theme is the making your stories make sense, or making the games coherent. And so that sounds like I'm asking for a framework, and actually it couldn't be farther from the truth. What I'm looking for is the opportunity for us all to play unrestricted and limitless, so that literally every session that we play, we have to look at the clock and go, oh yeah, we have to go home now, because otherwise we'd keep playing on, because that's really where we all fundamentally want to be and need to be anyway. So, if you are a person who has not played any of these imaginative games in a while, if you're familiar with the way corporate structures work nowadays, they almost always try to bring the beginnings of their conferences and their meetings and such with a form of gamification or whatever that they call icebreakers, the idea of getting us sort of back into communicative mode, even in a world that is increasingly less communicative and more associated with the electronics formatted environment of the modern world. What we do know, though, what I do believe, is that we don't need icebreakers. They're insufficient for what needs to be done. We really need jackhammers. And what I mean by that is we have become calcified as a culture. We have drawn boxes and drawn lines and established fan bases, and we've established frameworks for conveying information to the point where we have lost the ability to really be imaginative, and we need a jackhammer to break that apart. And maybe my videos are perhaps too in my own head, so to speak, and I'm endeavoring to get out of that mode by asking these questions, because maybe I need a jackhammer too, because I've become so one-sided in my way of thinking that it's hard to imagine the world as everyone else seems to be living in, as being as nearly as much fun as the one I live in. But maybe that's a Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know. But the point is that I'm here with the Nikos RPG message Monday through Friday, basically 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific every day, putting out a video or something to provide information so that you can become a part of our community and we can all grow together to have a more imaginative, more creative, and just a more enjoyable world to live in. Well, I've run my limit on my time on this episode. I want to thank you for being here with me tonight, and I hope to see you in another episode. And before we go, remember what my grandfather always said: yes, we've done enough work for today. Now go play.